Okay, hello everyone. We are back for our last session of today because we still got 2 days left. So we are here for creating community OKRs with Bree and Vicki. I am so excited for this conversation. I got to check out a little bit of what they're going to be talking about ahead of the summit, and it looks really, really good. So really quickly too, we're just going to push out a poll. Have you ever created community OKRs? So let us know, yes or no. If you have, feel free to share more in the chat. But without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Bree and Vicki.
All right.
Get the energy out.
I know. Should we start with some intros? Share who we are?
Yes.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Bree, and I have been formally designing and leading and growing communities in person and virtually for about 7 years. But I grew up in a bed and breakfast, so community and events have always been. Yeah, fun fact about Bree. It's kind of been there from the start, but I got my real start with community working with a social enterprise called Seiko, where I launched and grew a community of what we called fellows who drove millions of dollars for the brand annually. And now in my work with Ember, I partner with purposeful brands to help them transition from being product-led to community-led by crafting a community framework that activates their top customers. So I split my time between Portland, Oregon and Hawaii Island, and you'll usually find me in the mountains or splashing in the water in any form. All right, Vic, over to you.
I love that. That was so good. Mine is not as thorough. I'm Vicki. Please call me Vicki, not Victoria. It's still a dress I'm trying to have fit. It doesn't. I'm from Jersey, and I'm currently in Denver after living for a year in my camper van. That is not how Bree and I met, but as serendipity works, let it rock. I have been in the community realm for about 9 years, starting in nonprofits. Maybe any of you have heard of Tunnel to Towers Foundation based out of Staten Island, and then Remote Year, and then Osmosis. And now I just started my own company, Adventures of Community, where I work with individuals or organizations in developing their communities, their cherished communities. In other exciting news, I'm a Capricorn and an ESFJ, so working on my perfectionism as best I can on any given day. And otherwise, you can find me practicing tarot and playing volleyball and going on road trips. And side note, there are dogs here and they're loud, so I'm doing the best I can, but what are you going to do? If you hear them bark, I'm sorry.
Yeah, how it is.
Okay, cool.
Fun quick fact, we both have camper vans. So yes. The alternate, title for this talk was how to build out a camper van with YouTube videos.
And build community on the road.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so we're talking about OKRs, not KPIs, but there will be some interspersal. And Bree, I think you're kicking it off.
So speaking of which, how do you define OKRs and KPIs? I'm curious how you define each of them.
It's a great start. Okay, so objectives and key results. Objectives to me are broad. They're huge. They're an umbrella. They're a tree with branches coming off of it. So an example is, my objective is to grow engagement in online community. Broad. That could be done in myriad ways, right? And then the key result part of OKR is something that you see happen at the end of the road that tells you your objective was on point and accomplished. So for growing engagement in online community, it might be 10% engagement increase in at least 4 channels. Measurable, specific, and that could be a result you found at the end of the day. So that's like OKRs. Versus KPIs, key performance indicators. So indication, right? A signpost, a landmark telling you you're on the right track, keep on chucking, right? It's not a result, it's a tendency. So with that idea of a leaning or a tendency or an inclination, I might then think of a KPI for what I just said above is 4% net promoter score or NPS increase in the current quarter. So that would be an indication that I'm on the right track, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I got there or I'm going to get there. So there is a fine line of difference. I think OKRs and KPIs are often used interchangeably, and this talk is good for knowing the distinction between the two.
Yeah.
Anything you would add?
Yeah, no, I love it. I think for my own kind of like the way that my brain works, I kind of like to think about OKRs as like the combination of both that direction that you're going and then the metrics that back it up. And, you know, I had this like thought early this morning as I was reviewing stuff. If the objective is the direction, then oftentimes we like to treat the metrics like the GPS coordinates. Raise your hand if you've ever been in a position where this is the case.
I'll raise because you can only see me. Yes.
Right. It's oh yeah, I guess add a +1 in the chat. Also, I love the chat and everyone's.
Yes. I'm just looking at the chat. It's lit. Love it.
So it's a very frustrating place to be if your metrics are like, here are the exact GPS coordinates of exactly where you need to take us. But what I'd like to propose is that if an objective sets the direction for your goals, then metrics should be the stepping stones, or like you just said, Vic, which I love, the signposts to help uncover the ultimate destination. That's the only thing I had to add.
I loved it. You hit him with a mic drop. So yes. Okay, I'll ask the next few, I think. The purpose of metrics or data, however it is you say them. What's the point, honestly? Tell us.
Yeah. Man, it feels like you're giving me a level of authority I maybe shouldn't have with that. Just the gravity in your voice. There is a discovery process, right? No, but I think just to expand on what I just said. So metrics are like, to me, metrics are the mechanism for rethinking our assumptions about the community and the exact trail that we're on. So has anyone here read Adam Grant's Think Again? This was, I read it recently, so it was kind of in the forefront as I was considering this talk. But essentially what he proposes is the importance of reconsidering our assumptions. And I think about this a ton in KPIs and OKRs because oftentimes we treat them like this is the bullseye. These are the GPS coordinates of exactly where we're trying to go. But it's so much more helpful to approach the process as a scientist. And so I even had to go back to my like elementary days of like, what is the scientific process? But I thought it could be helpful to add in here. And I'm going to just comment with it. Because thinking about it in light of OKRs was actually really fascinating. So the 6 steps of the scientific method are: 1, asking a question about something that you observe, doing background research to learn what is already known, constructing a hypothesis, experimenting to test the hypothesis, analyzing the data from the experiment, drawing your conclusions, and communicating them. And so it's interesting. I felt this tension of like the different ways that you approach OKRs and your objectives way back in my my first kind of opportunity with community. We were growing the community and I didn't really have the language that I have now. But I remember this like really, it was kind of like a volcanic moment where we were like 3 months in and like I had my like KPIs. We were big into KPIs and we talked about them every month. And so it was like, this is your goal. And the community hadn't hit the goals for 3 months. And there was progress. We were growing. We had just launched, but it was like this big conversation around like, well, what are we going to do? Like, will this work? Will it not work? Should we do community? Should we not community? Not do community? And I just like kind of exploded a little bit. I was really like comfortable with my founders, so it was fine. But I was like, I'm not a guinea pig. I was like, this community is not a guinea pig. I was like, we are trailblazers, and we are like, yeah, like we are going to figure it out. But like, it felt like this like pass fail kind of test versus like this engaging discovery process where we're all together, like grappling and like learning and testing our assumptions. And so I didn't really have the full language then, but that was like my first explosive moment with like, this isn't working. The way that we're thinking about this is not helpful for me or for anyone in the community. So I deviated quite a bit there, but that's how I feel about metrics.
I love it. And I think we all felt how you feel about metrics. I wanted to add a point, but before I add that point, I wanted to add this other point from the comments. Yes, the talk about corporate speak. Okay, your girl's from Jersey and I like to keep it real. So I also am not a fan. However, I think that there is importance in being armored with all the information you could possibly have, which is why I think it's important to use some of these terms in what I'm saying now. And then I'll always try to like expound on what it is they mean. But I think it's good to know because there are words in the community world that people are using more and more. And it seems like people just made them up and I'm not quite sure. Okay. So I just wanted to toss that out there and say, I feel you. As I fix my glasses, metrics, in my opinion, also don't necessarily need to be cemented in stone. I think that's also a really great point to bring up. Just because oftentimes we're a team of one, so we're figuring it out as we go and we don't quite know yet what's going to hit and what's not. So it really is the scientific process, like just how you mentioned, and going into it with that mindset, in my opinion, brings the pressure down to a more palatable level, essentially. So on the same tip, I'm also not of the thought path that OKRs or KPIs, however you do want to use them, have to happen at a quarterly basis. That's just the way teams do it because no one else has come up with something different. But if your community works best in sprints, 2 months, 2 weeks, whatever have you, I did that in my osmosis medical education student community, and they work in semesters. So I just said, we're using semesters, everybody, half year 1, half year 2. So it's your world. Work it. That's what I say. So next question, Bree. What objectives are important to have for your community in general?
Yeah. So in terms of distilling them down into I kind of like to think about it, objectives as like these bigger buckets. So first is recruitment. How are we growing? It's really just asking the question, how are we growing? Engagement, how are we interacting? And then finally, leadership. So how are we developing our members? Those are the 3 main buckets that I tend to focus on for myself and clients when we work in community. Are there any other ones that you hit on, Vic?
Yeah, the only other one I thought to hit on is programmatic, and that may not be the term, it's the term I say, but the idea of how are you improving the functionality of the community? This is something I came across, in the work, and this can be anything from improvements of tracking. Are you working with your engineering or IT team if you have that? And are they creating reports for you? That would be great if you had reports. That adds to your potential for OKRs and potentially leading down the road of ROI, return on investment. Oh no, I know. Luckily, this panel's not about that, so we're not going to go down that road, but metrics allow you to get more easily there. So programmatic, also like your tech stack and things like that. Yeah. Yes. What about metrics for recruitment and growth?
So for recruitment and growth, some basic ones that I try to incorporate for each community are total number of community members, new community members, and then attrition rate. And I feel like this is a little bit of a divisive topic. I believe that you should have an attrition rate in your community. If your community is so broad that it's for every single person, there's no one who joins your community who should not eventually not be in there. I think that your community isn't about anything. That's my person. It's about everything. It's about nothing. And so I really believe that like a healthy community is pushing people. It's not pushing people out, but it's giving people permission at the appropriate times to leave. So that's my take on it.
It's a great take.
Yeah. Anything else that you would add to recruitment and growth?
My lightweight addition would be target market visibility. Okay. I was trying to be with that. But what I basically mean is, can people find your community by searching for it, or do they have to be invited? Those kind of metrics are good to have. For example, when I was at Osmosis, there was no landing page. So up to that point, it really just had to be word of mouth or working with B2B schools and hoping that one of those deans hit up a student and said, you should join this, community, I guess, and it just didn't make any sense. So part of what I tried to do and inevitably did do was hone that target market visibility. And it also is interesting. A little test you can do too is speak with different teams. If you work at a company full time and you have teams, right? Maybe ask each team lead who they believe is your target market, because that's going to differ and it's going to be funny. And you're going to have to sift through those weeds to figure out who is your target market. If in fact you did not create those personas yourself and do all that work on your own. Okay, I could too digress. Obviously, I have feelings about that. Okay, next question is metrics that are important to track for engagement purposes.
Yeah, yep. So it looks like Margot and Elisa were also you guys are right on track with us. So we talked recruitment and growth. Okay, so metrics for engagement. So I have 3 that I like to start with for this. 2 are quantitative and then 1 is qualitative. So for quantitative, what % of the community is in quote inactivity? So that's for you to define based on every community is so different. Engagement looks so different. So you kind of have to distill down and kind of define, just settle on something as a starting point, create a hypothesis for what you believe activity to look like. And so maybe that's, your objective or your goal, not your objective, but your metric is, okay, we're assuming and hypothesizing, if that's a word, 25% of the community is going to make at least 1 post a month as a starting point. The next is the quantitative rate of that activity. So for anyone who posted at least once, how many posts did they actually post that month? So of everyone who is quote active, what's the rate of activity? So from everyone who posted, the average posting per member was 2.5 a month. So you kind of need both of those. You need the frequency, but then you also need how much of the frequency. And then the third one that I like to incorporate is qualitative. So and this one is really where it gets really tricky, but we're talking about the average quality of the activity. So for posting and engagement, this gets a little tricky, and there are ways that you can set up. I don't know a ton of great tools for this. I know all the super spliced together Zapier empires built on toothpicks and marshmallows kind of vibe. That's my game usually. But if you have a dashboard set up with posts and you have someone who's able to go through, maybe even a virtual assistant, and kind of rate the quality of those posts. I think that's something I've heard Danielle Maville actually talk about before from her days at Etsy. So a way to, because, if you just have the first 2 metrics, right, I'm great, people are posting consistently, this percentage is posting and they're posting this many times on average, but you could have, they could be talking about nothing. The communities that, especially that I tend to be involved with, we don't just want chatter. Chatter is a vanity metric. We want good conversation, even dare I say great conversation. So making sure that you have a way to recognize that in your metrics is important. Yeah.
1,000,000,000%. You got a lot of comments in the chat, so I'm going to give you a second to look at those, and I'm going to add my 2 cents. Yeah. For those of you that are a bit more on the brand ambassador community tip, which is a bit more of my experience, not only with Osmosis, but at Remote Year, we relied on net promoter score. So essentially, how much on a linear scale from 1 to 10 are people in your community, would they recommend this community outward to their own networks, not just on social media, LOL, to the people in their lives that they care about? Would they recommend this? And then, the age-old number of referrals. And that was important for both of the communities that I worked with. because we relied on referrals to bring new people in, especially with medical students. It was an application-based community. So it was closed and exclusive, right? And people needed to find out about it. And the best way to find out about that is through someone that went through the whole program and shared whatever benefits they themselves received. So I think that those should also be mentioned. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, I just want to speak to tools really quick. So this is what I would do in this scenario if I didn't have a big fancy tool that does this for me. You can easily set up a Zapier integration, usually with wherever your community is. There's probably a Zapier integration where you can say, hey, any post that's made in this space, pull it into as a new row in this Google Sheet or Airtable. So I would have just like a Google Sheet or an Airtable that functions as your dashboard. All the content from your community is getting added into it, and you're able to then expand within that Google Sheet, and you can add like a quantity column where you go through and you synthesize, or you can just use like count ifs or VLOOKUPs to kind of, if you have another tab in that sheet or Airtable with each member's email, you can pull in like the VLOOKUP or the count if for like how many posts they made, or what a sum if for like what's their total quantity from like the value of their posts. So that's how I would set up like a really like scrappy dashboard if I didn't have the tools. I don't know if that helps. If people who are asking about tools can let me know if that helps give some I hope that that's in reference to what I was talking about.
Okay. Hard, honestly, to do these at the same time. So I'm going to not, and I'm going to come back over here to my points.
Yeah.
Hello, well, I'm like, I'm getting sucked in. Okay. The final question of like metrics to be tracking in these different arenas is metrics that are important to track specifically for leadership. What do the leaders know?
Ooh, okay. So this one's way more of a soft metric. So I know that there are companies that have crazy algorithms that determine like who their rising leaders are and who their leaders are based on a ton of different metrics. For me, this has always been pretty a combination of like looking at the metrics of like, okay, obviously we can see who is the most engaged and who is asking questions and who is requesting to be more involved. But anecdotally, I would ask each month or each quarter, who are your leaders? What do they need? And who are your rising leaders? And what do they need? And this is where this gets a lot more in the social science realm. And honestly, having a focus group consistently with leaders or rising leaders, asking them these questions is going to be the most beneficial thing that you can do to test the assumptions you're making about what they want, what they need, what's motivating them. So those two are ones that I like to start with. Who are your rising leaders? So ones who aren't quite there yet. And who are your leaders, and rounding out what's your definition of that? What do they have to accomplish? And bonus, if you make that really transparent in your community. So one of my like pet peeves in community is when there's just sort of like this mysterious upper echelon and you have no idea how to get there. But clearly outlining, and it really helps your community not become a clique over time, because you're saying like, hey, if you want to be a leader, here's exactly what that looks like. Here's exactly what you need to do. Anyone can do this. Here are the steps to take, and here's the materials to support you. That's like, to me, that just feels like a nice homecoming rather than like, oh man, those really popular people, and how did they get there? And why will I never be one of them?
I feel like that's a whole other topic that could really be delved into, because Lord, did I deal with that in a remote year, and it is not easy. But yes, great points. I'd like to just add, please. Also, again, on a brand ambassador advocacy tip, represent. Also knowing the either just amount or percentage, if you can somehow configure that, people that show interest in joining an advisory board or similar, if that's something that you have ever considered creating. Okay, advisory board, super user kind of program, who wants to join the beta of this, that can help you determine who's showing some leadership, and if there is a potential for that increase in your commitment curve. Shout out Carrie. And then also the percentage or number of participation in focus groups or something like that. I have a lot of experience with focus groups in particular, so that's why I use that as an example. Of course, it's not the only ones. There are those that want to create user-generated content for your community, those that want to lead an ad hoc call because your community manager is going to be sick and no one can fill in, but a community member can fill in. How unexpected. It can be as wide as that, or as narrow as you create it. So again, it's your world, right? Everyone, we're living in it. And so you can create those landmarks to hit.
Yeah, I love it. And what about for programmatic? Because we talked about that as a bucket. Do you have metrics specifically for programmatic that you like to consider?
Yeah, so programmatic was big when I was at Osmosis because there were a lot of complexities. There was gamification. We paid those students when they hit certain levels. And there was, monthly active usership that was based upon activities. And there was the referral program, and there were challenges. And it was hard to honestly get through one day doing one task, because that's just how much there was to do. And there wasn't so much help until I beat down the door of our data team. It was like, so this is what I need. This is why you need it. And this is how we're going to do it together. What do you say? So with reporting allowed me to realize how much opportunity there is in programmatic changes. But in that is, survey, I would survey. So either in the written form, or I'd have a one-on-one call with team leads of each team to determine, what do you know about the community at all? Just where are you at baseline? Because if they don't even know much about it, they have no idea how the community can in any way touch them. And touch everybody, right? So that's something to know. Definitely connecting your NPS, your Net Promoter Score, to something called the Spaces model. So this was, I'm sure it was written by David Spinks on CMX, but I'm not 100% sure if he created it or what. But the Spaces model is a mnemonic, and it's for, and I have it here, that's why I'm looking over here too. S is for support, P is for product, A is for acquisition. These are teams, right? C is for contribution, E is for engagement, and S is for success. So a way that I was able to really get buy-in from everybody at Osmosis when I was there and community was new is I created in a deck at an all hands call, not call. Wow. That just flew out earlier than I anticipated. I had a slide in the deck for each of those letters, and I spoke to that team specifically, and I shared maybe 3 to 4 aspects within their realm that community could touch, benefit them, benefit us, and it's a wonderful relationship, and that worked phenomenally. So that is what I suggest with that, and then of course adjusting maybe your tech stack. So when we were able to get a dashboard, it wasn't the best, but we were able to get a dashboard that automated the payments processing situation, and everybody did not have to be a 1099 contractor because we had international students, it was really just too much to handle just via PayPal, me doing it. So, that things like that work well in programmatic, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's great. I love that's all. I love how you brought in the cross-functional, how to work cross-functionally and get a little bit more buy-in on the team.
Oh yes.
And so I think that programmatic is a great place to do that. Is there I know we didn't really have this in our lineup, but is there anything else you want to add on the cross-functional side of how to do objectives within the context of a greater team that may or may not get it? Sounds like you have some stories to share.
I do have some stories, but you really asked me to deviate. I mean, I can deviate. Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you're in a small team or with a startup, everybody's wearing all the hats. Everybody now suddenly has 8 hands, not just 2. I don't know how it happens. And one has to make the intentional time to spend time with your other teams, because in my opinion, if you're only communicating when it is really that you need something and you're being nice enough to get to the point where you can ask amiably for the thing you want. In my experience, that doesn't really work long term. So my suggestion is really actually wanting to build those relationships with those other teams, literally, and then allowing the passion for what you do. I hope that there is that, to essentially come out of your pores and into these conversations. And with that, energy is contagious. I know this is very ethereal and feelings based, but I feel like my community people feel me anyway. But I think that when you're building those relationships across team, it allows for when it is you want to have these conversations and you want to maybe have a test presentation with someone from another team to get feedback to see if you should share this on the all hands call instead of being by yourself all the time because you don't want to bother everybody else. That ends up working really, really well, not only in your favor, but in the community's favor. And at the end of the day, that's really that's the bread and butter. So spending a few, I don't know, an hour out of your workday to engage with someone else on your team that inevitably you probably need down the line. Look, it's strategic foresight. That's life. We all do that. So that's what I say. I could go on, but that's all I'm gonna leave it right there.
Yeah, no, I love, and just the nod to being a curious human. I think genuine curiosity of like, hey, how can what I'm doing with community come alongside of the initiatives that you have? And there might be ways I can support you, there might not, I'll be honest. But I think initiating that conversation before asking, hey, how can I help you, or how can the community support what you're doing, or inform what you're doing, or make what you're doing even better, asking that question before you come and say, hey, by the way, I need this list of 10 things.
Right. Exactly. Because nobody wants to be continually inundated. So build it and then bit by bit inundate.
Bit by bit, flood them with
correct.
I love it. So I'm curious. I'm skipping. I've totally messed us up, Vic, but I want to know, because you talked a little bit more about the anecdotal evidence, and I'm curious how that has woven into metrics or objectives for you in the past. Practically, where has anecdotal evidence played a role?
Okay, anecdotal evidence. Yes, we're back in the ethereal realm. So I really tend hard toward the immeasurable or the more difficult to measure. And then inevitably collecting stories, having experiences that you can share creatively with your team that can provide more of a robust picture than just numbers, because really at the end of the day, community is about 100 times more than that. So you want to show its fullness, I'd hope. Ways that I have thought of but would love to add to. So if anybody has anecdotal ways that they include in their repertoire as evidence that their community is healthy, please do add. So I consider testimonials, written, videos even better. Of course, then you can add that all around in a carousel on your landing page, on your social media, etc. You can then, so something that I did with data numbers, I had to do it at least over 2 iterations. So I had to do it at least over the course of a year in order to be able to get to this point. But I wrote a story around the data that I got. So I got this from my mentor, Elisa Vigil, who was at Code Academy, the best. And she said, okay, if you're not actually understanding, or if you're at the beginning of understanding data and metrics and numbers, it's best to look at it on the screen and go with your gut and see what you're seeing and just notice what's happening over time, and actually in written form, craft a story about what it is you're seeing. And I now do that. And it is really helpful for me and helpful for the people on your team that don't want to admit that they're not very numbers oriented and love that you shared some numbers, but don't really know what the hell that means. So I share it in a story form. And I highly recommend. We can talk about that offline another time. Community health scores. So, that can be a number, or it can be how pop in the chat is in your monthly webinars, for example. You can observe how many members are engaging in a competitive challenge. Osmosis was filled with challenges at remote year. We had a lot of struggles, and one of them, remote year. So I oversaw a group of 50 digital nomads, 24/7, 365, and we moved every month for a month around the world. Okay. And I oversaw that group with one other woman who's my work wife. And we had to be everything for these people, essentially, guidance counselor, relationship coach, teacher, job coach, troubleshooter. I don't know any of the languages, but like, I'll talk to the guys that fix stuff, I guess. And with any community over that amount of time, it's honeymoon phase, and then you go down, and then you're homesick, and then there's a crisis, so we had a lot of difficulty in those ways. And just by observing what was happening with our group, they weren't as up as they were the month prior. Nobody really wanted to go to the co-working space. Nobody wanted to hang out anymore. Everybody was back in their apartments, cloistering. And we thought people were feeling homesick. And these people were not all American. They came from all over the world. So we had to figure out a way to pay homage to your home without being ethnocentric and also being welcoming and inclusive. So how do you measure that? Like, what is there to measure? Probably many things, but later when you consider what you've done in retrospect. I'm not going into that experience thinking, okay, here are all the ways I'm going to measure it. But the best thing that comes out of that is an NPS score, which is why I know it's a controversial thing in the chat, and I feel you, because your people with the most to say that are negative are often the ones that are filling out those NPSs, but they're also probably the people that you can learn the most from, because they're still there and they're giving you the hard truths, but they want this community to work for them. So really, I'd want to focus on those people, because I want to know how to make it better for you. Can I turn you from a 3 to a 7? It's a big jump, but it's not impossible. So that was long.
No, what I want to just touch on a nugget that you said, because I feel like if I could distill down, like, if 20% of the value in OKRs comes from like kind of the vision setting of like, this is where we're going, probably 80% of the value comes from the retrospective of like, less of like, let's project and like be fortune tellers about what's going to happen, and there's more value in the retrospective of, let's look at what did happen, what did we learn, what assumptions can we prove to be false, and what can we have a little bit more confidence in the future. There were some comments that I wanted to touch on, but now they're oh, and storytelling. Yeah, lots of love to the storytelling. I think we want to open up to Q&A.
Yeah, we could just keep on going. Oops.
What? You're just going to attend our fireside chat for the next 8 hours? Okay.
I mean, what are you saying?
Sometimes you need to tell people it's time to go. Oh, yay. This is an attrition question. Perhaps when the community becomes refined and they no longer fit that persona, how would you approach that conversation, method, call, email? Yeah. So I love this question. So I try to create some sort of standard for activity within the community that is expected. So some set of expectations that are transparently communicated of like, hey, if you're in this community, you are going to participate in this way, or, you at least log in, you're at least a lurker. Or for us in communities that I've managed in the past, there was like, for some communities, there was also a sales volume that was associated with their role in the community. Some people might be freaking out right now. It's okay. It was great. So whatever that definition for activity is, when they have not hit it, I tend to send an email about 6 months before any action would be taken, saying like, hey, here are the expectations for like what we want to see in this community. Here are some ways that you can get engaged and get started. Here's 3 things that you can do to activate your membership in this community. If not, like in 6 months, it's totally fine. And, if this is actually like, if you've already opted out, but just haven't formally opted out, please, like, you have permission to do so here. Like, don't shame people around leaving, saying like, I always like to say, I always respect a no that allows you to be all in on your yeses. So when someone says like, no, actually, this isn't a good fit for me, I just want to affirm that and say, great, like, pursue the yeses in your life with full force. I respect that no. So giving them multiple ways that they can opt out is helpful. And then a final email that says, you know, hey, these are the expectations. We'd love to have you in this community, but it doesn't seem like it's a good fit for what you're looking for. And if you're not getting value in here, then like, we'd like to stop wasting your time. So those are my thoughts.
Okay. We're in this Q&A section, right?
Yeah. I was up at the top. Yeah.
Okay.
Your turn. I'll let you pick from the.
Oh, maybe these are all questions ever asked. Okay.
I think
okay. That's good to know. So do community managers need data analytics and coding understanding? You didn't answer that, right?
No.
No. So let me chill. Okay. I mean, coding, no, I certainly don't know any coding. And I would not want to go down that world. It seems entirely too intense and my anxiety couldn't handle it. As I mentioned, ESFJ and Enneagram 1. So no. But data analytics, I think it would behoove one to go on even Coursera, go on YouTube, pay no dollars, go on YouTube and get a few videos under your belt of understanding in general and go from there. I didn't have any data analytics experience whatsoever, which is why I shared the story about creating the trends story. I verbally wrote out what I was seeing to better understand data. That worked for me. To give it a shot. It may not work for everybody.
Great.
I wonder when do we have a few more minutes left? I just don't know the time.
Oh, okay. So I think we're good. I think we're okay. Somebody asked, as a team of one, I sometimes think, am I measuring enough? How can we know?
Mm-hmm.
Really great question.
It is a great question. And I mean, if you're not receiving directives from whoever is above you, right, then it is up to you. And if that's the case, if you're measuring at all, okay, you're measuring enough. And then what will happen is as you start to notice some of your data points and your measurements getting routine, I think naturally, if you're already asking, am I doing enough? You'll create a new metric. I think that's how it is really done. There is no, look, there are guidebooks left and right. Okay. And they're being tossed out all over the place. And I feel that, and there's a place for that. And it's helpful as a guide, as a template, you can take some of these, adjust them, take them, do them exactly as is, look at them and say, this doesn't work for me. I'm going to create my own. So what I'm saying is there's no tried and true way, and there won't ever be, in this realm, which I think is wonderful really for us, because it provides a little bit of freedom and flexibility that maybe other disciplines don't have, like sales or product. So I am going to tell you, Anonymous, you're measuring enough, and you will naturally start to measure more as you glean more information through the content you consume about community. Because from your question and from you being here, I imagine you're doing just that. So yeah. You are a bright light.
I love it. One thing that came to mind for me with this question was, this is maybe a little weird. So I have like my backlog of tasks. I work for project management side. I work in sprints personally, and my backlog, or like what you could call an anti-library, is one of the ways that I assess, like, am I on the right track, is like, am I consistently adding things to my backlog? So, my backlog is like a magical place where like all the new ideas and like random like insights or feedback or like thoughts about things that we could do differently get placed. And so if my backlog is like feeling dry and I'm feeling like, okay, what I'm starting to feel a little bit in that like unconscious incompetence stage. Like I don't know what I don't know, and I don't quite know what's next. That's probably a good indicator that I'm not getting in the right feedback loops. And if metrics and goals are doing anything, they should be creating those feedback loops for you, right? So that would be one like indicator, maybe, is like at the point that you start to feel like you're running dry and you don't really know what you don't know. Probably a good indicator to like dive back in either to your objectives or your metrics, and honestly probably a good indicator to get on the phone with people in your community.
Yep.
We had another question. One thing I've experienced in tech is that KRs should never be completion based, aka did this thing get done or not? I'd love to know your take on this. Do you want to take that?
I'm just going to reread it. I was just looking for it.
Oh yeah.
Is that care should never be completion based? Well, okay. So I think that's when, okay, I agree. Let me start there. I agree in that experience in tech and with startups, that KRs should never be completion based. And I say that because I think that with those tech and startups, everything really moves at light speed, and your priorities can change so feverishly that it really can be difficult to get to completion of anything. This is actually something my boyfriend talks to me about a lot. He says, I don't complete my thoughts. I just run, which I find fascinating because I never thought I had ADD, but here we are. So I wonder if that sort of frenetic, chaotic energy is actually the world that we navigate in when we're in tech. I don't have to wonder. I imagine I'm getting a lot of nods in the ether there. So, I think that semantics is at work here because OKRs does have a definition. And I think that especially in tech and in the startup world, they may not necessarily be connoted correctly. That is truly how I feel, and from my experience. I am curious to see if others feel similarly or if it's completely different. And also if you use OKRs or KPIs or do your own goal thing.
Yep.
Oh.
I plus one that. I popped back over to the chat, and something I wanted to pop in on was Scott added, the more metrics you can point to, the better you can justify your ask. And so that was going to be something I was going to add about anecdotal evidence. Like where is it appropriate and how much and how to use it? I guess one of the big questions I have is like, what's the objective of your objectives and your metrics? Like, is it just, are you the only one reviewing them each month? Then like, you might look a lot different than like if you're pitching to a whole team and saying like, and having to like kind of justify your ass a little bit. Like, sorry, I don't know if we're allowed to swear in here, but it depending on how you're using your metrics and what the objective is for them, like anecdotal evidence might be, there might be different ways to use it, and there might be different intentions behind it. So in addition to like using metrics that you want to point to, it's honestly kind of sales in a lot of ways, right? And so in some ways the metrics are helpful to be able to point to, but that is actually where I think anecdotal evidence can be the most impactful, because you want to exhibit, and especially when community, it's a vibe, you want to help emote what is going on in the community. And so that's where I would also include anecdotal evidence when you are trying to ask for something or you're presenting to a team. I think anecdotal evidence can be even more powerful sometimes.
Agreed. Bree, that's it for us.
All right, y'all.
The time is here. We're actually over. I mean, oops. Okay, well, thank you for coming.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much, Vicki and Bree. This was so insightful. I feel like everybody in the chat, first of all, shout out to everybody in the chat who was also sharing tons of resources and information.
Love the
I
chat.
learned so much from all of you in the past 45 minutes. So thank you so much for this amazing conversation. Again, everyone, this is our last session of day one. We've still got 2 days left. So there is tons of learning, reflection, and fun to come. You can catch the recording of this session if you've missed anything or just want to share it with your team. It will be available in the replay section of Hopin. Literally in the next like 5 minutes, I will be uploading it there so you can check it out. But thank you all so much for attending. The community-led career fair is actually starting right now in the expo section. So if you are actively job seeking, please head over there. You can still pop into our regional breakout sessions as well. Those will be open all day and all night. So whatever your time zone is, whenever works for you, go ahead and pop in there. And we will see you again tomorrow. Thank you so much, Bree and Vicki, and everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye. Ciao.